Okay, so I am going to, so Mary has a bit of bronchitis. Well, I don't. I tend to be loud. So I've told them that if I'm too loud, just say, Yemi, tone it down. I also have one of my team members here, Carla Hayes, and I said if I need to lower it, simmer it down, to flag me. So Carla's back there. If you see someone waving their hand and it looks like they're going to break out into a dance like we don't care, you know it's Carla. But good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. You know, I've always wanted one of these mics, and I feel like I'm having one of my Janet Jackson moments. I'm in control. I can't really sing. But, you know, this past weekend, I believe, was the Golden Globes. And I always love to watch it because of the award recipients and the types of speeches that they give. And so this is my Golden Globe moment because I'd like to thank the members of the Academy, really, for inviting me to join you here today. You know, Mary, you may not know this, but actually I think it was about November 23rd, 2013. I picked up my copy of the St. Louis Business Journal. And at the very back, every now and then, they have guest editors. And the guest editor, or person who writes the editorial, happened to be Bob Chapman. And I remember reading that editorial, and it was about giving thanks and appreciating employees. And, you know, I'm glad that Carla Hayes is here, who's on my team, because afterwards, you know, I walked over and I said, you know, have you heard of this person? Have you heard of this company? And she said, yes, I'm actually a fan. If you're able to find out more about them, I think we should A, partner, and B, find out more about their Leadership Institute. So it was actually then that I got to know the Barry-Wehmiller team, and subsequently I mentioned it to one of my then board members, Ann Althoff, who's an executive at Clayco, asking her if she knew anyone at this company. Now, mind you, it was at the back of my mind, and I was just trying to figure out how to make it happen. But one day Ann called me and she said, you know what, Yemi, I remember I have a friend who works there. Let's all get together and meet up for breakfast. And we did. And it was a fantastic conversation about leadership. I was levitating when I walked out of that meeting, and I was like, I really, really love these St. Lucians, as I fondly refer to St. Lucians. And, you know, I said, I cannot wait to find out more. And after that, I got a chance to go to lunch with Mary and her colleague. And the rest, they say, is part of what I think is collaboration and partnership of exploration of what we can do together. But today I've been invited to come and talk to you about my leadership journey. And, you know, I had to sit and think, and, you know, I was just like, you know, is it a straight line? Is it a crooked line? How do I talk about this within the context of my own lived experience? And, you know, I said, you know what? My leadership journey has been somewhat circuitous. You know, I didn't really have a plan for it, you know, because there are individuals that when I was growing up, I'm originally from Nigeria, and my parents were born and raised in Nigeria. And when I was growing up, you know, there were a number of different people that I read their books to be inspired. And, you know, I was thinking, oh my goodness, it's going to be real easy to become them. Well, I don't know what I was smoking then, but, you know, what I realized is there were some lessons that I gleaned along the way. And so, you know, my leadership journey, as I mentioned before, I'm originally from Nigeria, actually began with my grandparents. It actually began with my paternal grandmother. And there you see a picture of my dad, Reverend Dr. Samuel Titilola Akande, and myself. And my paternal grandmother, she had this dream that she wanted her son to go to college to get an education. He was her oldest son. And she didn't really quite know how to make that happen. Because at that time, you know, they were living in a little small village, you know, not really a term you use anymore. But the village that they were living in at that point was called Awe. it's spelled awe. And I said, you know, that's really great. You know, I should just say, Dad, you know, you're from that village called Awe, and you went on to do amazing things. But in that little village, she was an entrepreneur, is how I would describe her. She sold things in the marketplace. And, you know, she just would tell her son, it's like, you know, someday I see you leaving this village, going on to finish high school, to go to college, and maybe to go overseas. And my dad thought, you know, Mom, you've hardly ever been out of this village. You know, what do you know? Well, unfortunately, she had a dream because she knew the transformative power of education, but she never lived to see that dream happen because at the age of 18, when my dad was 18, she passed away. But you've always heard that African saying that it takes a village. Because she had mentioned this to her other village women, they decided to pull resources together to make sure that my dad would go on to not only finish high school, graduate from high school, he went on to teacher training college. He then went to the US, something that she never got to do, and went on to get a PhD in New Testament history. And so from that basic experience of my paternal grandmother having this dream that her only son would go to college, talk less of in Nigeria, but to the US, is where it all began for my dad. And it's really become a family tradition in the sense that my parents instilled in us that education really does have transformative power. And so from here, you know, the quote there, dreams are the voices of ancestors. You know, every now and then, you know, my dad wrote a book on, you know, his biography, because, you know, my dad did a lot of things in his life. He actually turned 90 last year. And as part of the commemoration of his 90th birthday, you know what my dad decided to do? He said, I'm going to write a book. And I was like, really, Dad? Okay, I'll check in with you later on that. And he goes, what else am I doing? I'm semi-retired. All I'm doing now is whenever I call my parents who still live in Nigeria, I said, oh, Dad, so what's on the calendar for this weekend? And he's like, you know, once you're a minister, my dad was a Southern Baptist minister, you're always a minister, you never retire. So he tells us, oh yeah, I have a wedding at 10 a.m. I have another one at 1. And then, you know, to close out the day, I have about 2 or 3 funerals. I was like, okay, I'll talk to you later. I gotta go now. But, you know, one of the things that both my parents have actually inspired and instilled in us, besides the education, is always going beyond what many might think is just the baseline. And when my dad was in his 60s, I think that was like the second retirement for him, he decided that he was going to run for the president of Nigeria. I was in college then. And I remember, you know, calling my dad, and there was a lot of noise in the background, and I said, you know, Dad, what's with the noise? What are you celebrating? And he goes, no, I'm not celebrating anything. Hola, Yemi, which is my full name. And I was like, was I bad? What was up with the full name? And he said, no, I've decided to run to become the next president of Nigeria. And I was like, oh my God. And he said, I'll keep you posted. And I said, that's fine. You know, what's interesting is, he went on to run for the president of Nigeria. He didn't win, but what he did, because he knew that political communications was of interest to me, is he collected all the advertising and all the editorials that were written not just about him, but about other candidates. And if you fast forward to about 6, 7 years after this, I actually ended up using all those materials for my dissertation, which looked at Nigerian editorial cartoons during a particular period in Nigeria's history. So I said, Dad, thanks for the research. I'll give you acknowledgments in my in the dissertation. But in 1983, here I was in Nigeria. I was about 15 years old at this time, and here's what was going on in Nigeria at that time. And I shared this with you so you can get the context in which I grew up. And in January 17th of 1983, Nigeria expelled 2 million illegal aliens, mostly people from Ghana. And the reason why this stood in my mind is because my paternal and also my maternal grandparents at one point in time had lived in Ghana. And so many of the individuals that we did not know were illegal aliens at that time ended up being expelled by the Nigerian government. So it was something that was important to me, but also at that very early age, I started to think about migration from one country to another and what individuals do when they, and what their expectations are when they go to another country. Also on February 26th, Michael Jackson Thriller album goes #1. And back in those days, oh my goodness, it was always the Thriller party after school, hanging out with my friends, and we're all singing Thriller, Thriller. Does anyone hear that old enough to remember that? Okay, good. I'm not dating myself here. And you know, long ago I was like, oh geez, if I ever made it to America, I am going to find my way to meet Michael Jackson because I'm going to find a way. So he puts an MRS before my name. Well, that didn't quite happen, and thank God it did not. Also at that time, David Bowie's Let's Dance was #1. And you know, those were the best of times growing up, just you know, given the diversity of music that we were listening to. And also in June, Arthur Ashe, who to many of us in Nigeria, it's like, wow, here's the first, you know, African-American black person playing tennis. And we didn't have tennis courts in Nigeria. So, you know, what we would do is, you know, we would just play air tennis. That was before it actually became an app or something like that. And it's like, okay, you take a stick. It's like, oh, hit it. But, you know, the fact that he had undergone double bypass heart surgery was something that stopped us all cold. It's like, is this a dream shortened, given that we were looking up to him? And who at that time knew that he was from Missouri? I didn't know that. Also, September 17th, Vanessa Williams, who was 20, was crowned the first African-American Miss America. And you know, it was important. I think it was 83, 84, thereabouts. And October 19th, US Senate established MLK Day as a federal holiday. That was seminal for us living in Africa. And last but not least, Nigeria's National Assembly dissolves after military coup. Let me tell you something about military coups in Nigeria. It's just another day. We always say, you know what? We'll see what happens tomorrow, who gets toppled. And you know, the military coup, whenever it happens, you're either in school and you have to figure out, okay, there's gonna be a little bit of traffic disruption. How am I gonna get home? Because the school bus, I know it's not gonna be working that afternoon. So this is gonna be a long trek. And you know, I'm sure for some of you, you probably had parents who would often tell you, you know, back in the day, we used to walk from school and it took hours. Did anyone of you have parents like that? And my parents would say stuff like that, and I would say, give me a break. Until I was in high school, until a coup d'etat. And it took, you thought the traffic was bad here when it snows and it's icy. It took me 4 hours to get home. Mind you, I stopped along the way and ate my way back home. But you know, I say, well, I can tell my nieces now, it's like back in the day, you know, I would walk from school to home and it took that long. And those are just the realities of the time that I grew up in. But also, I graduated high school in 1983 at the age of 15. And I was so excited because, you know, I asked my parents, I said, okay, Mom and Dad, you know, where am I gonna go to college? Is it gonna be here in Nigeria? And they go, well, you know, let's see. If you can get into a university here, fine, we'll give consideration to you going abroad. 2, if you can get into a university in the US, we'll let you go. And I was like, oh, joy, lovely. They go, thirdly, if you can get a full scholarship, you have our blessing. I was like, oh, why didn't we have this conversation when I was 13? But luckily, I had grades good enough, And I ended up going to Southwest Baptist University in Bolivar, Missouri, because my parents had friends there. They picked the country, they picked the place, and they picked Bolivar, Missouri. And growing up in Nigeria, I grew up watching Fame. And so does anyone remember that show, Fame? I'm gonna live forever. And so my thought of what my American journey was going to be was like, so just in the middle of class, the teacher just starts singing, and we all get into line, and we start singing Zodiac. Well, to some of you, this may actually be known as Glee, but that was not the case. I remember arriving in Bolivar, Missouri. It was pitch dark, and I was like, okay, I cannot wait till morning, because I am gonna have my first McDonald's. They didn't even have McDonald's back then. I was so disappointed, and I said, what is an American experience without McDonald's? How dare you, Mom and Dad? I'm gonna teach you. I'm not gonna write you any letters. They're like, really? We'll see how quickly that changes when you need money. I was like, oh yeah, that thing. But there was Tasty Freeze. Does anyone remember Tasty Freeze? Oh, they had the best crinkle fries. And I loaded up on that. And so if you see my picture graduating from high school to my freshman year, it was like I went from something to Marshmallow Girl. It was just like inflatable Yemi. But I loved going to Bolivar, even though I had this notion of what it could be. But what I was able to learn was true American values. Some of which I liked, some of which I didn't like, some of which made me feel uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, what it really helped me do is to realize that oftentimes we really don't see things as they are, as it is, we see things as we are. And that was a rude awakening for me. So the bank, I was really excited to open my first bank. It was at Commerce Bank. And I was like, okay, I love this thing that they have in America, because we didn't have that in Nigeria. You always had to go into the bank and converse with people. But in America, they have this thing called drive-through, which I termed to mean walk through. So, my first day to go open a bank account, I was like, oh gosh, these cars are going around. I think I'm gonna walk around. So I stood behind a car, exhaust fume coming, and I'm like, this is annoying. So I walked up to the mirror and I said, yes, I'm here to open an account. And she just looked at me like, where are you from, Africa? And I was like, oh my God, how'd you know? Can you come in? So, banked at Commerce then, and just really loved that experience. Eventually went on to pick up a bicycle because I could get to places quicker and faster. And so therein began really my American journey. And when we look at different experiences, in our lives, even though I call it milestones, they're actually moments in time in terms of people that we interact with, things that shape what our vision and what our perspective is of life. And so what I'll be sharing with you, and I want this to be interactive, so feel free at any point in time to just, slowly raise your hand, which I'll take as pause, and we can have a conversation. But before I dive into what I consider, these 10 milestone moments filled with really examples of individuals that I've come in contact with, I'd like to take a brief moment to talk about Focus St. Louis. How many people here have heard of Focus St. Louis? Okay, good. Means I was meant to be here when only 10 people in the room have only heard about Focus St. Louis. But Focus St. Louis is the region's premier civic leadership organization. And simply put, what we do is we educate leaders, we connect leaders, and we facilitate important conversations. Focus has been around for about 50 years. And when I say 50 years, it's the cumulative years in which the organization has been around, because at any one point in time there were disparate nonprofits. But we have 8 leadership programs, and I'm glad to look in the room and see a few of our graduates here. Our Coral Willow grad at the back of the room, wave to everyone, yes, is joining us here. And, did your class have a tagline of any sort? Or you just went through the program and graduated from it and it was all good and you're still with us? Okay, great. And I see the city administrator for the city of Clayton joining us here, Greg. And you must have had a tagline for your Leadership St. Louis program.
Best class ever.
Best class ever.
I know this because 3 of my classmates are in your brochure.
Okay. That was a plant, right? Yes. And Greg is a graduate of our Leadership St. Louis program, and I'm glad that both of you could join us here today. So at any point in time, I may just pick on them to dialogue with us here. So the first milestone that I want to talk about today has to do with this one where I love this graphic because it shows a man that's swimming in asphalt. Have you ever had those moments in your life where things just seem so impossible that you just say, you know what, peace out, I can't do this? Have you had any of those moments? Yay? I see head nods. What have you done? You just stop, or what did you do? I'm going to pick on you here.
You keep going.
You keep going, great. Is there anyone who stopped along the way? You stopped, why did you stop?
It was much easier.
It was much, you thought it was much easier, or?
To stop.
To stop.
Stopping was easier.
That is true. Stopping oftentimes is much easier, but then there are times when you just have to be persistent. And when I think of my experiences over the years, I could share with you any number of them. And the one that I think of most recently actually has to do with Focus St. Louis, where I work. And about a year ago, we started conversation about launching a new program that we call Focus St. Louis Impact Fellows. And the focus of that program is around community problem solving. And we decided to start that program because we had been talking to our alums about what do you want to see and what do you want to continue to do after you've graduated from our program. And we have 8,500 graduates, 70% of which still reside in town. And they said, we want to be able to help solve a community problem. So we looked nationally for best practices, and we found one, Bingham Fellows out of Louisville, Kentucky. And I started to build that program in terms of making the case for it with funders. And we were very generously supported by the Kemper Foundation to launch that program. But then it came to recruiting. And everybody said, no, can't do it. No, yeah, just let it go. Or better yet, how many people did you say you wanted in the class? And I said, I don't know, 23.5. And they go, who's the 0.5? I said, I don't know. We did that for budgetary reasons, we'll see. But oddly enough, with collaboration of key members of my team and community partners, we were able to launch that class, that cohort, with 23 individuals in March of 2016 last year. And so, I have these screensavers. I have most of this as screensavers on my screen for reminders of when you feel that it is just way too hard. You can't do it, as a reminder of the fact that you really need to keep on going. And perhaps, it's that persistence that's really going to make you successful. So when I was about 8 years old, my parents moved. You'll hear me use the term village a lot in my presentation. A village in Nigeria is a city of 1.2 million people. But my parents lived in this relatively small town when my dad went to college here, Louisville, Kentucky, and then subsequently moved back to Nigeria. And when we started out the little village, I didn't have a lot of friends. And I was like, oh my goodness, what have my parents done to me that they would move to this town where I can't find any friends? Well, fast forward, they moved to a bigger city. And And when they moved to a bigger city, I was like, gosh, we have diversity here. I can go out and meet people. My parents said, this is not the village we used to live in, so you have to be careful. So in many churches in Nigeria, there's this group of young girls called, Girls Auxiliary. And the church that my dad was pastoring did not have a Girls Auxiliary group. And so I decided that I would go around the neighborhood within reason and start introducing myself to people. And here I was, a little girl. The times are much different then. You could do that without someone dragging you into their house. And I would knock and say, hi, my name is Yemi Akande. My parents just moved down the street. Do you have children? And they would look at me funny, like, are you lost? It's like, no, not yet. And some of them would respond that, yes, we do have children. Do you have kids my age? And they go, yes. And I'll ask to come in. And then I would sit and talk to the family and would meet their little girl. And I would say, we're starting a club at the church down the street. We'd like for your daughter to come join us. And they're like, okay, do we have to come? No, not if you want to come on Sunday. So here I was in the neighborhood, recruiting for the Girls Auxiliary and also recruiting for my dad's church too. And within a matter of like 6 months, we had 60 girls. And I was so proud of myself that I had a little team of girls that we could do things together. And it was just so exhilarating for me. And when I look back at that time and sort of the skill set that I gained from it, it really helps me in my position today as I go around and talk to people and try and make the case for them. Another thing in terms of when nothing is sure, everything is possible, and taking the not really you can't do and putting it back in possible is, I've always had a dream of having a radio show, but I did not know how it would happen. And a couple of years ago, before I took early retirement from being a college professor, I was talking to one of my colleagues, and I said, I'm really interested in a radio show. And he said, oh, the school has a radio station. And I was like, yes, but I don't really know how we're going to make that happen. So I walked away from him. He emailed me that night, and he said, Yemi, I talked to the folks at the radio station, and we've saved a slot for you. Can you come up with a name for the radio show? And I was like, whoa, just that quickly, by having a conversation and learning more. And I went back into work 2 days later, asked my colleagues, I said, what should I call this radio show? And they say, why don't you call it Making the Case, ... And every week you can fill it in with whomever your guest is. And so therein started my radio show that I really wasn't quite sure how it could happen. And it was called Making the Case. And I had the radio show for about 4 years and got to interview people just from all walks of life. And oddly enough, I would say that some of the folks that I was able to introduce, I've actually come to meet them again here in St. Louis, which is interesting. I have this delusions of grandeur of perhaps even starting the radio show again here in St. Louis. So in terms of another milestone that I want to talk about is this one, in terms of be bold enough to change the status quo. Have you ever been in a position where you feel as though, geez, if I spoke up, I would be told, you know what, we don't want to hear from you. It's not time. You should go away and write a plan and then come back and present it to us. Have you had those moments? How did it make you feel? Just curious. Anyone can throw it out there. How'd you make you feel? Don't? No, dumb? Okay. Anyone else?
Unnecessary.
Unnecessary? Okay. You've had those moments.
Excluded.
Excluded? Okay. Good point. So, in my experience, it's interesting how I got into the field that I am today. because I had dreams of, you know, possibly being a college professor for really a career. But halfway through that dream, one of my former students introduced me to her boss. And we went out to dinner, and she said, you know, Yemi, I want you to meet Lynn. I think you'll have a lot to talk about. And we did. And then after dinner, Lynn looks to me and says, Yemi, you know what's really interesting? I said, what's that? And she said, you know, I think you would be good at my position. I said, are you kidding me? I'm a college professor. Love this. I love the fact that I have summers off too. So this whole 8 to 5, 9 to 9, I don't think so. Thank you. Good luck to you. A year later, I heard from my former student, Hannah Belcito. And Hannah said, guess what? And I said, surprise me. She said, my boss left. And I said, what's that got to do with me? He said, I think you should apply for the position. And I said, oh, really? I'm going to visit my parents in Nigeria. I'll talk to you later. She was persistent. She said, you know, apply for it. And I said, you possibly couldn't make this fit within my schedule. Vacation coming up. I'd like to focus on that. Research paper coming up. I'd like to focus on that, because you know the whole academe, what do they say, you know, publish or perish. So she said, just throw in your resume. I said, okay, I'll go ahead and do that. So I threw in my resume, and they called me the day before I was to travel to Nigeria. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you for the opportunity, but I'm traveling to Nigeria, so I don't think I'll have time to talk to you. And they said, do you have time for an interview right now? And I said, okay, actually I do. So I went ahead and interviewed for the position and, you know, thanked them profusely afterwards and went on my trip. While I was on my trip, I got an email for a second interview, and I said, oh, thank you very much, but I am out of the country. And they said, when are you back? And I told them the date, and they said, can you come downtown for the interview? And I said, sure, what have I got to lose? So I took the train downtown. This was in Cleveland. And, you know, after the interview, I thanked them again. I said, school starts in about a week and a half. So again, good luck with your search. If I can be of assistance to you in any way, let me know. They called me the Friday before school was to start to offer me the position to lead what was then the Cleveland Executive Fellows Program housed at the Cleveland Foundation, which at that time was the third largest community foundation in the nation. I was sitting in my office in between breaks. We had been doing this session for a first-year seminar when I got the call. And, you know, I just said hello because I recognized the number, and they go, is that Yemi? And I said, yes. Who is this? And said, this is Kathy Stecky. And I was like, well, howdy. I thought they were calling me just to thank me. And she said, well, I'm calling you to offer you the position for the program director for the Cleveland Executive Fellows Program. To which I said, really? Trying to stay cool. And they said, we want to talk to you about the salary. And I said, okay, I can have that conversation now, because in my mind, I was going to another meeting. And so she said, here are our expectations she shared with me, which really wasn't all that bad. But again, in my mindset, I was thinking, I'm just going to throw out a ridiculous amount. And I did, and said 0.67, which was the year that I was born. And she said, well, we can do that. I will get the letter to you shortly. When can you start? And I was like, just like that, I'll be. Okay, now I got to go turn in my letter of resignation, find somebody else to teach my courses for the rest of the semester. But all this to say is, when I started as program director for the Cleveland Executive Fellows Program, what they brought me in to do was to disrupt, to shake, to challenge, to evolve, and take the program to a higher level. And this was an Executive Fellows Program of young professional leaders who had taken time out of their career for a year to explore the public, the corporate sector, the media in Cleveland. And in my first week, I started a week before the fellows who had already been selected to start. I said, you know what, we're going to go global with this program. And I remember talking to my then boss, and she said, oh, that is such a fabulous idea. So you go write a business plan, and when your business plan is done, we'll analyze it, and then we'll go on track to where maybe in 4 or 5 years, we'll be able to execute that. I hear some, yeah, you've experienced that, right? Yeah. So in my mind, I knew two things. One, I will not be there in 5 years. And two, I needed to execute that. And in a matter of 8.5 months, we went global by taking the Cleveland Executive Fellows to China. And for a majority of our fellows, they had never been out of the country. I had never been to China myself, and we went to Beijing and Shanghai, and it was a phenomenal experience that for each one of the Cleveland Executive Fellows that went through that program, it was a seminal moment in their lives. So when you have those moments where you feel as though someone's telling you, you're not necessary, you can't do this, just pause and strategize. Is it Wayne Gretzky that has that quote about, anticipating where the puck is going to go, and that's how you should strategize. And, that's how my career has always been. I anticipate, strategize how to get there. And, I'll pick on Greg here for a minute, just in terms of what's going on in the city of Clayton. I think the city of Clayton is a place where everybody wants to be. If I was thinking correctly and straight, when my husband and I first moved here, we should have bought real estate here, because I know it's going to go through the roof, especially with what's happening at Centene. So another thing that we should always think about, and that really serves as a milestone moment for me, has to do with the fact that you need to develop relationships with people before you need them, and not waiting until it's relatively too late for you to approach those individuals. And when I first came to St. Louis, I'm really good when I move into a community, I try and map out the individuals that I would, in an ideal world, really get to know or should know. And I just go have coffee with them, just to pick their brain. It's like, help me understand and be educated on the politics of the region. And I've had tremendous support in doing this. And I've just cold called people a lot. And one of my favorite individuals in town is Maxine Clark. When I first moved to town, it's like, I can't believe Build-A-Beer is right here. And I'm one of these people that I could go on a website, and don't ask me how to do this, but I can tease out together what the email of the CEO could possibly be, even though it's not online. And I remember sending her an email asking her if I could meet with her. And she responded. I was like so shocked, and I was like, oh my goodness, St. Louis, I love you already. We're gonna do great things together. And oddly enough, Maxine Clark actually introduced us, Focus, to the people at Aspen Institute, and we're one of their community partners. They're launching a Youth Leadership Fellows program within the next week. And so, if you have those individuals, make those connections with them. Don't wait until you need them and say, hey, I'm looking for a job. Can you help me? And what's your name again? Start them today. Ignore the doubters. We all know that we are all celebrating the 10-year anniversary of the iPhone. How many people have iPhones here? Are there any Android folk in here? Okay, not bad. Okay, my next phone is going to be a Droid, because I finally convinced my husband to come into the 21st century. He has one of those flip phones, and they're of value because if you're traveling overseas, they will work in the subway. My phone won't. And so it's like, now that he has the Droid, he's like, look, my phone can take better pictures than yours. And guess what? I know what accident is 2 miles from here than your phone does. My phone is totally useless. It can't do that. But think of Steve Jobs and his idea around the iPhone. A lot of people did not believe that it was possible. And look at us today. Who would have thought that all those apps and the things that you can monitor on it, the sky is the limit. I use it mostly for retail therapy, but that's okay. But when it comes down to it, there's really no blueprint for success. You get to create what that looks like. Someone asked me, when you were growing up, did you ever know what you wanted to be when you get there? And I said, there was an essay that I wrote when I was in 4th grade. And I said I wanted to be an architect of people. I don't know what that means. I just like the term. I said, somehow building people, putting people together and what have you, and, connecting people. And oddly enough, what I do today, a lot of it is around the notion of, you can build your own footprint, blueprint for success and define it however you want to. It helps to focus, pun intended. I work for Focus St. Louis. Because if you can't focus and you find yourself going in several different directions, there's going to come a day that you're going to wake up and go, oh, which is it? Which direction do I go? So it's very, very important for that, for you to focus, laser focus on what it is you want to accomplish, what your goals are, and how you're going to find people to support you along the way. Opportunity knocks and small incremental steps is also another important one. I say yes to a lot of things. And people are like, where do you find the time? It's funny, you know, I'll come in the office on Monday and Carla would say, Yemi, did you really need to respond to that email at that particular point in time? And I said, actually, no, but I want to, because I just happened to be sitting there when they made the ask, and you know, I'll say yes, I'll go explore things. And you know, several years ago, I applied for a job at Yale. And during the salary negotiations, I just had this funny feeling, I can't explain it, intuition, that at that particular point in time, given the amount of travel, it wasn't the space for me. And so I'll never forget, it was 2001, and right before I went to work that week, I decided I'm going to give them a call. And, you know, I remember saying, you know, I'm really sorry. Thank you for the opportunity. I thank you for your time, but this is not the position for me at this particular point in time. Dropped the phone, went to work. I lived in Chicago then. By the time I walked into the office, everyone was gathered in the conference room, and I was trying to figure out what is going on. Well, that job would have involved a lot of travel, and what I learned once I walked into the office, because I worked in an international education organization, that 9/11 had just happened. And so we worked in a space where we had a lot of students that were traveling and studying abroad. And you know, I said no at that particular point in time, but another opportunity that came up allowed me to really slow down, focus, and look at what else could be out there for me. So there are times when you will get some things and you'll say, oh no, I'm definitely going to pass on this. Explore it, because it's through that exploration that you will figure out what is next for you. The next one has to, and I love this this cartoon, this funny. I'm sure we've all read this. I hate my job. You probably scan it every day, and it shows, you know, those little penguins. Thanks to global warming, that stupid bear will never get us way out of here. But if only they could look behind. He was adapting. They were not. There are times that you'll find yourself within an organizational culture that you have to adapt, or even in situations, places you live, that you have to adapt. You know, when my parents moved back to Nigeria after my dad finished his PhD, one of the things, my Yoruba wasn't quite good. And so all the, which is my native language, all the neighborhood kids, you know, would always make fun of us. It's like, oh yeah, say that word again. And I was like, oh gosh, got me. Well, then we went with my maternal grandmother, who spoke very fluent Yoruba. And in a matter of 6 months, we were so fluent, nobody could tell we spoke English. And not only that, she also taught us African proverbs. And so, you know, if a kid did something, we'll just rattle off an African proverb. And it's like, how old are you? And they would just, you know, scuttle away. So we adapted to the culture to where today, you know, I speak very fluent Yoruba. So something that I would say in your jobs, whatever situation that you find yourself, it's important that you are very adaptable. Collaboration is key. It's what helps me in the position that I hold today. I can't do it alone. My team here, you know, one of the things, so I'm one of these idealists, and I surround myself with individuals that are realists. And, you know, my team member who's here is very process oriented, because I'll walk into the office and I'll say, okay, picture this. Here's what we're gonna do. And she's like, okay. And then she starts to ask questions, the art of inquiry, follow up, and it's like, okay, great. That's a project for you, because apparently you've thought through this process. Now go execute. But we do it in unison. I see one of our friends from Washington University here. We collaborate with them on a thought leadership series that we launched last week, talking about the millennial generation and how we need to make our workplace more inviting to the millennials. And last week I shared with some folks, I said, many of us want to hire them, but what's most important is we figure out ways in which to retain them because it's for the greater good of our region. So given some of the moments that I've shared with you, you're probably wondering, has she ever failed? I've failed tons of times, but you know what? As painful as it is, I have an incredible board of directors that I advise everyone to make sure that they have one. And I'm lucky because not only do I have community leaders, I actually have some people on my team that I would seek their opinion on things because they can give me a different lens with which to look at that. But I also happen to have 4 siblings that, when I fail and I'm just like, oh, that hurt. Each one of them really has a role. I have a brother who happens to be the president of Westminster University in Fulton. And, he's kind of the hardliner. It's like, yep, so what you gonna do about it? And I was like, but I just want you to, it's like, what are you going to do about it? I have a sister who's a administrator for the city of Brentwood. And my sister, love her. She's also, hard knocks. What are you going to do about it? And I was like, what do you mean? What am I just want you to hug me and say it's going to be okay. And she's like, get up, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and keep on going. The key thing is, when you do fail, you will have moments of adversity that you need to pick yourself up by really your bootstraps. Look around you to see who can support you in reconfiguring and taking a second look at what it is that you can learn from your experience. And last but not least, you gotta have a sense of humor. If you don't have a sense of humor on those bad days, you're just gonna crash and burn and think, oh my goodness, my world has come to an end. Every survival kit should definitely include a sense of humor. I remember when I lived in Chicago and I was leaving the position I had working for an international organization. Went to dinner with some of my friends and they said, oh, what's happening upstairs? And I said, what's that? And they go, it's a comedy club. And I was like, yeah, well, what does that mean to me? And they go, well, it's open mic night. And I was like, is that so? And they go, and you're going up there. And I was like, and you are smoking something. Well, I went up there and I had tons of fun because I made fun of all of them. They were the butts of my joke. And it's like, Amy, is that what you were really thinking about us? And I was like, yeah, now that I don't work there anymore, it doesn't really matter. But, in those moments, it's important for us to always have a sense of humor. So I want to leave you with, last Christmas, my husband and I took a trip to Atlanta, or to some of you may know it as Hotlanta. And we visited Martin Luther King Jr.'s National Historic Site. And I was struck by the quote that was on the screen there, because it really is a question that I live by every day. That at the end of the day, it's not just about me, as it is, how can I be of service to others? And so I ask you, how, in what ways can you be of service to others in what you do? And I'd like to end this, with what is also one of my favorite quotes by Lao Tzu: a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. And you all have the possibility, the opportunity to take that step, or to be of service to somebody else in taking that step. There's greatness certainly in every one of us. Thank you for your time.
Anybody has any questions for Yemi? We still have a few minutes, so if you have questions, just